think. Croatian national anthem. Seem to face up to the facts. I'm tense and nervous and I can't relax. I can't sleep cause my bed's on fire. Don't touch me, I'm a red light wire. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Better run, 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 run away. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Better run, 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 run away.
All right, well, I don't want to keep you too long, so let's get right down to the topic here.
Yeah,
So let me explain the framework here. Okay, so I do a segment on my show called Cryptic Corner.
I know Cryptic Corner.
Okay, and I do cover a lot of cryptozoology stuff. And there was this Victorian notion of the killer ape in Africa, that whether it was a gorilla or what it was, had different names for them. That they lived in Africa and through history up until, like you mentioned, the Billy ape, when we were communicating back and forth. People are still trying to find this lost mystery ape, right? So I figured I'd do this 100th episode segment on it. And my audience, like, we have a huge overlap in our audience for this segment. So yeah, so they will love to see you on here. So keep this on the down low until next Saturday. But
Nothing.
yeah, so I figured I'd have Erica come on and I'd pick her brain about this concept and kind of how it overlaps with the actual study of primatology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so that's my background, right? Like I got my BSA in pre-professional animal science. I was on the pre-vet track, but then I got my master's of research in primate biology, behavior, and conservation. And I'm a current PhD student entering my third year in biological anthropology. So I am absolutely tickled by the concept of these large cryptid-esque, apes, be they in the heart of Africa, or as they used to, very inappropriately call it, like the dark continent, right?
Yeah. The dark heart of Africa, yeah.
The dark heart of Africa is just like, oh God, cringe. Versus, you get the bipedal apes of North America, Bigfoot and Sasquatch and Abominable Snowman.
You got the Yetis and everywhere. Uh-huh.
Yeah, you go. Like you get a lot of really interesting cryptids that are they're like the wild man archetype, and some of them are more, usually if they're actually primates in the local area, they tend to be more non-human primate-esque, and if they're in areas without primates, they tend to be much more human. And it's like, it's like the wild man, the savage, blah blah blah, whatever. And it's all very, very dicey sometimes.
I have a question about that with things like the North American, or not North American, with things the European wild man and in the medieval images and stuff. Now I know that they're like in Germany and such, there were apes. Yeah, large apes. So I wonder if these ideas were based on maybe some early fossil finds in Europe.
I mean, yeah, who's to say? I would say as well that, for a very long time, humans, as in anatomically Homo sapiens, from about 300,000 odd years ago to now, when we typically, place the origin of our species all the way up to the more anatomically, behaviorally modern Homo sapiens. We, for the vast majority of the time our species have existed, have inhabited the world with other hominins, and other hominins that lived in different ways. They were human in different ways. There's more than one way to be a human, of course. And so I think it would also not be outside of the realm of possibility that some of these other hominins survived a bit later than perhaps we give them credit for. Not till now, I would say. But, 10,000 years ago, even 8,000 years ago, it wouldn't shock me, given Neanderthals survived at least until about 40,000 years ago. If they themselves, or at the very least memories of these people, survived, and given we're humans and we really like to otherize people, that's
People
like our
groups, yeah.
we like to otherize people groups. And like, this is a really double-edged sword, because the idea of the othering is thought to have evolved because it's like, well, it increases our in-group closeness by othering the out-group. And so it's like, oh, it increases social bonds within the group, which is great for the in-group and horrible for the out-group. So it wouldn't surprise me if people, being how people are, refer to these guys as like something less than human, when they're different members of genus Homo. But yeah, like Miocene apes, they were in Europe, in places like Germany, about the middle Miocene, until about 7 million years ago is usually like the rough date that things start to kind of disappear in Europe. After you get the catastrophic climate change occurring at the end of the Miocene, and switching from like this warm, nice greenhouse, or like all these lovely, humid, foresty areas that apes can thrive in, to not that seasonal and very hostile towards animals that rely on kind of a consistent climate. And it shoves all of the apes back into Southeast Asia and into Africa.
So when it comes to these ape groups moving throughout the old world, right? Where did carnivory arise? In did it arise multiple times in multiple groups?
Oh, in apes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's a really interesting question. Like, I was actually talking with a vegan individual on Twitter about this today. So all primates, as far as I know, are opportunistically omnivorous. And the reason for this is because most primates are capable of at least occupying a semi-generalist niche, for those of you who get mad at me for mispronouncing it. But it's like, meat is really high in energy. And especially if you're something like a folivore, you sit around all day trying to digest what is, pretty undigestible material, you could use all the help you can get. So most primates today are going to be opportunistically omnivorous, and some more so than others. So for example, lots of cercopithecoids, things like baboons and macaques, these guys are going to do a lot more opportunistic carnivory than something like a leaf monkey, right? Or like a langur, or something along those lines. And apes tend to fall right on that line, with gorillas not doing that much opportunistic omnivory. But chimps are on the other end of the spectrum, where they are going to really, really prioritize meat when they can get it, which isn't very often. I mean, it's not even 10% of their diet, but still, it's meaningful enough to them that it acts as social capital. Those who procure meat can share it with those they want to improve relationships with. They will tag team hunts. So usually groups of males, although females tend to join into it as well. And females on their own will typically hunt with tools, but they will procure bush babies or duiker or colobus monkeys, things of that nature, and eat meat. And bonobos will do it too. Like, this is something that I feel like a lot of people don't appreciate, but bonobos, they're peaceful compared to chimps, but compared to like gorillas, they can also get a little violent. And
they're still pannins. Yeah,
they're still pannins, right? They're still pannins. And we're hominins and pannins. We're one another's closest living relatives. So as far as like, where did carnivory first emerge? One of the primary hypotheses for like, why did primates evolve in the first place, is something called the visual predation hypothesis. So it's this idea that when primates first emerge, our adaptations existed for capturing insects, right? So grasping hands up in the trees, big eyes. And these days it tends to go hand in hand with the angiosperm coevolution hypothesis. So these two things kind of go in tandem, getting fruit and spreading seeds for fruit, co-evolving with the angiosperms, and also consuming insects. And that kind of creates the original
the pollinators,
primate.
Yeah,
the pollinators, right. So you get your original primate form, and things diverge from that. So if we're like, okay, when did we first become carnivorous? It's like, if you want to take that idea, it's like the very, very beginning, and it's actually lost as a primary diet in most primates. But as I said, most will also opportunistically eat eggs, bugs, little vertebrates, or even larger vertebrates if they can actually get their hands on them. It all just depends. And like, that's what makes primates so interesting and kind of so prolific, is because they're so capable of filling this generalist niche when need be. And a lot of being a generalist is just, what can you eat? What can you digest?
It's almost like all the other primate or all the other anthropoids will eat anything that a tarsier would eat.
Oh yeah, yeah. And tarsiers are like the only strictly carnivorous primates, right? Like they are the only one, which kind of makes the killer ape idea even funnier because it's like if you actually had a killer primate, it would just be a large tarsier with the eyes lurking, you know, with this weird lanky limbs through the underbrush in the dead of night, which is much spookier than like a big cute gorilla.
They always yeah, that kind of brings me to the next step on the way, because gorillas, the discovery of gorillas and the way that they were reported on in the Victorian era, especially in England, but throughout Europe as well, painted a very, very different image of what we came to find out about these animals. Do you know a bit enough about that history to lay it out?
Yeah, so a touch, right? But I mean, like you get all these Victorian folks, you know, the gentlemen adventurers who head down to places like you know, sub-Saharan Africa and far out in Indonesia and places like this, and they're first encountering all of these animals. And like we must appreciate too that it's like that's when gorillas were discovered by the West, right? Like people who lived there were like, yeah, dude, like it's just gorillas. Like they just hang out and we don't bother them and they don't really bother us. But
and sometimes we eat them.
Yeah, because it's like, yeah, exactly. I mean, you really want a killer ape, right? Like the killer ape was inside your house all along.
Right.
The thing is like in, you know, pinning gorillas with being these violent apes, it's just such a misconception. And like, I understand why it was made because most gorillas live in a polygynous social system. So the way that this works, for those of you who might not know, is you've got a male, and there are several females who kind of stick by that male. Now, contrary to how like your run-of-the-mill kind of incel-pilled folks on Twitter might place it, right? Like he's not violently keeping these females present. The females stick with him because they have children with him, and they know that he will protect the interests of their kids in case another male comes along and potentially commits infanticide on them. When females don't have dependent offspring, they're liable to just take off and go somewhere, and the male will try to prevent them to, but he can't keep track of all of them, right? So the group that's sticking with the silverback is somewhat in flux depending on the status of the females. But it's like you get these Victorian adventurers, right? And they're cutting their way through, you know, the Congo bush, and they come across a troop of gorillas. And you've got a male, and he sees this random strange looking creature come through the brush, you know, dressed in all these funky clothes and carrying a big loud stick, and he wants to protect his group. So what he does is he charges. And one of my buddies actually just got back from studying gorillas. I think she was in Luongo, but she told me that like it's not uncommon for males to bluff charge. So they basically charge to say back off. It's the same thing as like an elk putting its antlers down to say don't come near me. It's not necessarily like he's actually coming to kill you. He's just charging you to say get the hell away. But these Victorian adventurers see a gorilla charging at them and perhaps understandably get scared and shoot him before they realize that he's actually not trying to kill them. He's just saying get out of here. It's the way that they communicate with one another. And so all of a sudden now you've got this narrative of like, if you even come within eyesight of one of these big male silverbacks, he's going to come and immediately try to kill you, which would have been a lot different from these guys first encountering something like a chimpanzee or bonobo later on, or orangutans especially, who are like, I don't care who you are or why you are there. So the narrative would have really quickly proliferated amongst, you know, especially like your broadsheets, right, where everybody's like, oh yeah, look at another gorilla attack in the heart of Africa. It's a bummer, but
yeah. So there was this adventurer called Duchalis that actually he was a protege of Richard Owens. The Richard Owens, who wanted to define, he was sent down, or he sent the skull back to Owens, but he went down and shot a gorilla, and he brought sculptures that were built of that image, right? And that's where, and then for the first half of the 20th century, that was repeated in newspaper comics, in book illustrations. This image of a gorilla grabbing a woman and taking off into the jungle with her, a white woman specifically, you know. And then it became I call it the King Kong effect. I'm calling it that in my video here. So Yeah, and then that's where the archetype of the killer ape really takes hold. But it's not even the apes that you really want to worry about. The apes that are truly a danger, right? Which I mean, gorillas. I no doubt they could be dangerous if given the right circumstances.
Oh yeah.
Um,
But I mean there's not a single lethal attack in the wild of a gorilla and a human documented as far as I know. They just don't, there's no reason to. You know, they don't see humans as like something worth killing even, right? It's the males are in competition with other males primarily and the females are in competition with other females. But the females are, they're not typically the ones who are trying to I guess protect the group unless you're looking at like if you try to get in between a mom gorilla and her kid, I'm sure you would get ripped to pieces. But you know, typically speaking, these guys are coming up on these groups and the females bail and the male charges and ends up getting shot. And it's really sad.
Rinse and repeat, and that's the way the story goes. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then they say, oh yeah, and then the legends start of, oh yeah, the gorilla came into the village and stole these people, and you know they start embellishing additional aspects to the characteristics of the gorilla. Oh, this tribe in the dark heart of Africa, like you said, this really mighty whitey colonial language that they used. This tribe sacrifices one of their women to the. There's actually a documentary that I found, Nagini or something like that. That's allegedly about a gorilla in a village that was kidnapping women, and it was a gorilla, a guy in a gorilla suit was the monster, but the women were just native women with like black grease paint on. It was really quite racist, but interesting to see how they displayed. And they used orangutans for some shots of the apes. They used chimps for other shots. Really interesting direction they went. Armadillos played a role in the ecology that they presented too. Yeah, which is bizarre.
I mean, like, yeah, you got to think too. I mean, it wasn't until Diane Fossey really got out there and did her work with gorillas and was able to send back word, like, yeah, like these guys they're not just like peaceful, they're super peaceful. And no one really expected gorillas to come out on top as like the most peaceful of the apes at that time, you know, because Goodall was studying chimps and Galdicus was studying the orangs. And even orangs can be a little bit more persnickety than gorillas can. It's quite fascinating. But like you think about this idea of like a gorilla coming in and stealing women. A gorilla doesn't see a human as a potential mate. Like it's not going to come after a person.
We just don't we don't have the right pheromones to attract gorillas, unfortunately. No. Yeah. Even though we share pubic lice with them, which is weird, but
it's something to think about. It's definitely concerning to me. But yeah, I mean, male gorillas aren't violent towards females either within their own troops. Like males don't batter females. Like you see some male, you know, violence towards females of like chimpanzees occasionally. But you don't really see it all that much, which, you know, kind of, it's interesting in a sad way when you look at how common it is in humans versus how rare it is, comparatively speaking, in other apes. I personally think it has a lot to do with the isolation of humans. You know, we live in such an atomized society today. You can't rely on kin to come to your aid when you need help. So, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay, and moving away from gorillas and refocusing on chimpanzees, which are a real threat to humans, probably in the wild. I don't know if there's too many reports of them killing people in the wild. I know that they definitely can be threatening towards people.
Yeah, I mean, chimps too have different personalities, right? I mean, Jane Goodall studied the chimps at Gombe for so long, and she knew the chimps. She knew their personalities, just as, you know, a dog has a personality, a human has a personality, chimps do as well. And some of the alphas that she followed through the years, you know, later, the one that I saw when I was in Gombe was Ferdinand, and he was perfectly chill. I mean, you could walk right by him and it was okay. Frodo was the alpha near the end of her tenure there at Gombe, and he was absolutely vile. I mean, to my understanding, there's actually a rule you can't go into Gombe if you're under a certain height or under a certain age. And the reason is because Frodo has killed before. He killed a child, actually, which isn't very surprising because chimpanzees will practice infanticide. And they also hunt colobus monkeys. So small things that look kind of like them are like consistently in danger, unfortunately. But as far as I know, chimpanzees aren't typically going to like go out of their way to attack an adult person. And part of the reason is because like they're quite a bit stronger than us, but it's not worth the risk. They don't tend to go on one-on-one bouts. They tend to get coalitions, and their violence tends to be social. So it's directed at other members within their group, or even members of another group that they're trying to systematically annihilate. Chimpanzees are pretty interesting.
Do the chimps understand that we're more dexterous than them, but they're stronger than us? Are they aware of that flux in our?
I don't know. My understanding is that they have some appreciation for it, because chimpanzees that are in captivity, if they can't perform a certain task, can like look to a human, like they'll look at a human to like get the job done for them, because they have an understanding of like, I can't do this, but I know that you can. Now, whether or not they can trace that specifically to our dexterity and our slow twitch muscles, I don't know, but they're certainly intelligent enough to have an understanding of like, this is what I'm capable of doing, this is what you are capable of doing. But like, yeah, I think they also understand too that humans, even though I think they understand that when we have like a weapon with us, it's kind of a different story.
Yeah.
We become very dangerous when we've got, the Rudy Tooty point and shooty.
So yeah, you probably don't even need a real gun, just something that looks like a gun, right? And they'd give you a wide berth.
Or now, a sharp weapon, they can attack with sharp rocks and sharpened sticks and things like that. They can hit each other with objects, and they will, but like a steel knife, I'm pretty sure a chimpanzee is capable of being like, I am not going to go over there right now and mess with that person. And I don't want to ruin chimpanzees' reputations too much. They are known for their ability to have coordinated violence, and they're political animals and things like that. But they're also incredibly complicated animals, much like humans are, right? Or gorillas are, or bonobos are. So not all of them are violent, and their violence is familiar in how it's utilized. It's not just wanton, violence for violence's sake.
It's political violence. Really, it is.
It's political violence, and it's relationship violence. It's those two.
So they have the same, very much like us, both domestic or political. It's always, yeah. Now, there was the Gombe Chimpanzee War. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this was the first documented systematic annihilation of one group of chimpanzees by an adjacent group. So you had one of the groups, I can't remember I think it was the G group, but I'm not sure. It was one of the groups that effectively would patrol its territory, and it started patrolling into the territory of the adjacent chimpanzees. Now, typically the ones who go on these patrols are males, which is also familiar to what we do in humans, but not always. In fact, what I found was really interesting in reading one of Richard Wrangham's books is that females will go on these patrols, but only if they have no kids, which is, again, it's also very familiar, right? Like they don't want to risk getting killed because they've got an
infinite home. Yeah,
they've got an infinite home. So, but the females without dependent offspring would sometimes tag along. And the ones who did so consistently. So they had kind of the same propensity towards like territory expand, territory protect. Anyway, so these groups of chimpanzees would penetrate into the adjacent society and find lone males, almost exclusively lone males. Sometimes they would attack females, but rarely would they attack them. And even rarer was lethal attacks on females. So it was explicitly males. So they would attack these males and they would kill them, like not just kill them kind of, but like kill them viciously in ways that are unnecessarily vicious, like biting off fingers, ripping off ears, swinging the testicles around.
Mutilation,
torture, really. And it's kind of spooky, right? Because like they understand that these are the vulnerable portions. These are the portions that hurt. And it almost seems like they're sending a message, like, I'm sure all the other chimpanzees in the area heard what was going on. Sound travels quite far in the jungle. And they did this systematically, right? Going from lone chimpanzee to lone chimpanzee, catching them off guard or unaware and killing them. And eventually all that was left was females, right? And the remaining females either pushed further out away and never came back, or they were assimilated into the troop. And that's what the war was, right? Is that it was this, really more than anything, it was a conquering, it was a conquest, it was a chimpanzee conquest. This one group absorbed the other systematically and intentionally, and like these patrols
viciously.
Yeah, and these patrols were not random, right? Like they were coordinated and they were incremental, right? So it was like we're going on another. And the way that you can see, you hear these patrols described as very eerie. You know, chimpanzees are loud and playful and whatever. They are dead silent when they're moving through the underbrush, specifically on patrols, right? Like when they're moving around, like from tree to tree or from food patch to food patch, like they're raucous, they're loud, they're having a good time. But when they're on patrol, like to go and invade, they are quiet. And one will take lead, like they like a whole like point strat. It's nuts when you read
Oh,
some of
wow.
and it's interesting too because like this has happened at Gombe, but to my understanding, like the eastern chimpanzees, so Kibale and Gombe, are a lot more violent than the western chimpanzees at like Thai forest. And you know what's fascinating with that as well is that the females actually have closer bonds in the western chimpanzee groups than the eastern chimpanzee groups, and they're less violent. The idea being that females understand the risk to their offspring when these kinds of tussles break out and when they kind of invite trouble like this, and so their goal is to kind of more commonly is to diffuse it and keep relationships good. Again, not always, because females are going on these patrols too. So I think it has something to do with the dependent kid, honestly.
Yeah. The mother not wanting to risk getting injured while out on patrol and leaving her kid with no one to care for it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
or bringing the wrath down of the adjacent group and having your kid get killed, right? Like I think
Yeah.
they have to understand it. Like they're just more risk averse when they've got a dependent offspring. And you see
So,
this behavior too in males where there's a lot of male paternal care. They're much less keen to take risks when you've got a kid.
so you mentioned that there was almost exclusively against other males. What about infants? Were the infants of the other troop, were those killed as well?
If they could get a hold of them, they were. Infanticide is because the males have a clear understanding of like they want to mate with females because it's going to give them offspring. And females are typically in chimpanzees and in bonobos. Interestingly, they're interestingly similar in how in primatology it's like promiscuous, but that language is kind of silly and dated.
Yeah.
But the idea is that it's a female who will mate with multiple males. And in chimpanzees, this is thought to be a strategy against infanticide. So if you mate with all the males, none of the males know who the dad is, and so it prevents against infanticide. Bonobos have zero risk of infanticide. There is absolutely zero risk of a male killing their offspring because the females will kill him if he tries. Bonobos are female bonded and matriarchal, and so they are very violent towards males that cause problems. And so there's no risk for infanticide, but they're also extremely promiscuous. In fact, they're way more so than chimpanzees. They use sex to diffuse social situations and social tensions. And so you've got this interesting. It's almost like I think that's almost a bit of support for like the common ancestor having the regular infanticide, infanticidal backing for the promiscuity, as it were. And then bonobos are just kind of like, no, screw that. Like, this is just fun. Like, we just want to do this
Yeah.
anyways, even though the infanticide risk goes away. But yeah, so the males would go in, they would kill infants if they could. But like, they weren't really catching that many infants because the infants are going to stay with mom, right? And so this is why I don't know this for sure. I'd need to check it, but I would wager if I double checked the assimilated females versus the ones that fled, I would wager that the ones that fled had dependent offspring because they know if they move into the group with a dependent kid, that kid is not going to see the end of the week.
It'd be safer to live. Would it be safer to live in like a little female group until your kid grew up and then come back?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know if they would do that. I don't know if they did do that. They might have, but like, I mean, it's risky to be a lone chimpanzee. There's leopards, and chimpanzees can fall prey to big predators that live in the areas. But still, you know, it's probably better to stick to the periphery at least with your offspring if your group is toast, because otherwise your kid's definitely getting infanticided. It's pretty reasonable guess.
All right, and okay. Next thing I wanted to touch on is similar to chimp behavior, but let's take it interspecific with gorillas because that's new. As far as my news feed goes, that's fairly new. Within the last couple of years, this new research has been coming out.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So like chimpanzees, this is one of the ideas, one of the hypotheses between like why are chimps and bonobos so different? And one of the reasons that's been proposed is that chimpanzees have to deal with gorillas. And so dealing with gorillas, having a propensity towards violence is going to be beneficial for them as far as securing resources goes, whereas bonobos don't have gorillas in their habitat, so they can be really chill. They don't have to have these, very aggressive, proactive tendencies. I don't know if that's, I don't know, like,
Is
if I
the is
believe
the
that.
the chillness of bonobos and the chillness of gorillas, is it the same type of behaviors? Are bonobos filling the gorillas' niche in their habitat because there's no gorillas there?
I would say gorillas are probably more chill than bonobos, because bonobos will still hunt, and like
Yeah.
they'll also still fight. Like the males will fight and the females will
Okay.
fight, and females form coalitions to get what they want, and like they're just less. I like to think of bonobos as chill compared to chimps, but like they still can. I mean, again, they're also really closely related to us, so like they can also have a real mean streak when they want to. And like my friend who studied gorillas studied bonobos first, and she was telling me like, yeah, especially when they get a hold of like a monkey, like a colobus monkey or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, being it up, like they can be exceptionally cruel with that, because they're curious. It's like a toddler but with no empathy, like for something that it deems a food stuff, right? Because when little
Yeah.
kids have access to pets, they're like, oh, this is a pet, like I'm not supposed to hurt it. But to bonobos, they have access to a little monkey, and they're like, well, we're eating this, so might as well play around with our food a little bit. I mean, they're extraordinarily empathetic to one another, but not to stuff that's going to be eaten.
That's why they can give Coco a kitten, but you don't see them giving gorilla or chimpanzees a kitten to play with.
Or bonobos, or
Yeah, or
bonobos.
bonobos. Yeah.
Gorillas can handle a kitten. Chimps, panons, not so much. I think they're just too rough because they're so curious, and they're curious in like a very active way. So they're like, I want to see how this thing works. But yeah, like the idea is that chimpanzees are more violent than bonobos because they are sympatric with gorillas. This is interesting because we have other apes that are sympatric, right? Like orangs are sympatric with gibbons, but they never harm each other. I mean, a gibbon can like walk right up to an orangutan and it is perfectly fine. We house them together in zoos. So I don't know necessarily if that's the reason. I think maybe it has to do with that plus a predisposition that may have evolved in chimpanzees much earlier in time. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that chimpanzees, as I'm sure everybody who's doing the channel probably knows, will kill gorillas sometimes. And there was a report on this published a couple years back now, probably 1 or 2 years back, of a successful infanticide of 2 gorilla infants by chimps. And what was really weird about it, at least to me, is that they didn't eat the gorillas. They killed them, but they didn't eat them, which suggests to me that they weren't killing the gorilla infants because they saw them as like a rival chimpanzee group, or as a food source, but as a rival, similar to a rival chimpanzee group, because they also won't typically cannibalize other chimps that they eat. They will sometimes, but not typically. So they kill these infants, and then and a female was involved in that too, in that lethal attack. So it's very, very strange.
Yeah, from what I understand, the silverback tried with all his might to drive him off, and they kept coming for the baby and wouldn't.
He tried for a bit, and then he was like, "This is too many chimps," and he was like, "I'm out of here." And it's one female. I mean, female gorillas are bigger than male chimps, but not by much.
Right.
So one female gorilla versus 5 or 6 chimpanzees, male or female, it doesn't matter. Chimps aren't that dimorphic, and so they're going to be able to get a hold of that offspring. And I mean, it just didn't work out. I mean, and I think that's what's funny is that poor gorillas get painted as the killer ape, and chimpanzees are the ones seemingly starting all the fights. And gorillas even. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Can chimpanzees be housed with orangutans? Or I say orangutan. Sorry, it slipped off my tongue.
No, to my understanding, no. To my understanding, they can't be housed with anything.
Okay. Even bonobos and chimps have to be separate too?
Oh yeah. Well, they have to be separate because they're socially incompatible.
Yeah.
I mean, a chimpanzee sees the highest ranking male as the dominant in the hierarchy, whereas bonobos, it's the top ranking female. Females form female coalitions. Males form male coalitions in bonobos versus chimps, respectively. So you'd have a poor sad. You put a female bonobo in with a bunch of chimps, and she's gonna be trying to get the girl squad together, get the gang together, and all the female chimps are gonna be like, "Screw you! I don't want to hang out with you. Like, get out of here."
Yeah. Stop spreading feminism up in here.
You don't do feminism here. And then conversely, you'd get like your trad wife chimp over in the. Actually, female chimps will occasionally form coalitions, and when they do, they're badass. So I think it's really it's less tradwifey and more like doomer preppy. Like they're like, whatever, we we have a rough lot here and we're just going to kind of keep to ourselves. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's funky because gorillas are weird. They are follivorous, so they eat primarily leaves. They'll sit in leaves all day, and their teeth are adapted for that as well. But given the opportunity, gorillas will pick fruit over leaves 100 times over 100. They don't like eating leaves, and they'll only eat leaves when there's no fruit around. So what's fascinating is that in areas where gorillas and chimpanzees are sympatric, you've got fruiting seasons and non-fruiting seasons. When the season is good and there's a lot of fruit to go around, chimps and gorillas, they're fine. Like they will eat in the same general area. There's plenty of fruit to go around. They won't hustle each other. But when the fruit becomes out of season and chimpanzees have to, their fission fusion grouping system. So fission, they stay together, fusion, they stay together, fission, they spread out. So depending on how many resources there are, they change their grouping. When fruit is scarce, they fission out and form much smaller groups. And gorillas won't touch fruit, and during that time of the season, seemingly because they don't want to have competition. They fall back on leaves when fruit is out of season instead of fighting the chimps for the fruit. And that lethal attack occurred during the non-seasonal period. So I don't know if they ever showed support for this, but the idea was that the chimpanzees were already on high alert. There wasn't very much fruit to go around. They saw the gorillas and they just went for it, get out of here. And then they managed to kill the kids too.
Oh my gosh, that was I was shocked to hear that because it was it's like something out of fiction, really, because those kind of interactions. You think of chimps and gorillas living in the same areas, but maybe to me it seems like maybe the chimps live a little bit deeper in, and the gorillas live more are in the open areas. Is that
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's how they range. So chimpanzees versus gorillas have different ranges, and their patterns are different as well. So like I said, gorillas will stay in one stable group. Chimpanzees change their grouping patterns depending on the season. They move around a bit more. There's just a lot that goes into it. But yeah, it seems like something out of fiction. And again, not all chimps are like that. There was that Disney documentary Chimpanzee from a while back. That was actually a really interesting, weird situation that showed an individual personality rising above general trends. It was a male chimpanzee who adopted and took care of a younger male chimpanzee, like a kid that was, his mother got killed. This is an infant that would normally be infanticided. He took him under his wing and even carried him on his back. He treated him exactly, as a mother chimp would treat her offspring. They're people in a way. They have their personalities. They're not literally people, obviously, but they have personhood to a degree, I think.
I'm actually an advocate of that, so I think that
as well. I think they deserve personhood, at least greater consideration than what they're getting now.
There's a reason why we say anthropomorphized, because they're anthropoids and they need to be recognized as anthropoids at least. I could extend it to different clades too, but I'll stick to apes for right now.
Obsidians, so many deserve greater consideration than they are currently getting.
Corvids.
Yeah. Oh yeah, corvids. Yeah, corvids. That's gonna be tough because those guys are the only ones out of the group who are just everywhere. They're just
and they're
out.
assholes too. They're like we don't want to. Fuck you, humans. We don't.
Yeah, they'll intentionally mess with you. And you can befriend them, right? They'll bring you trinkets, little shiny things.
Yeah, I watch a few channels where the ravens, or I think they're crows, that exchange stuff for corn and stuff. Yeah,
they befriended them. It's so the kid. I often wonder if maybe some of these ideas of the killer ape might have been initially bolstered by these misunderstandings of gorilla behavior and then kind of propped up by chimpanzee behavior and captivity, which before we actually learned how to house them, which I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of an angry chimpanzee.
Oh yeah, I even remember the zoos from when I was a kid. I'm a few years older than you, but the zoos when I was a kid, they still had the apes in concrete enclosures. There wasn't really much to it. Yeah, it was back when the big cats were still in the size of my bedroom with this iron bars all around and a roof over their heads, and it was in a bale of straw in there with them. It was sad, but yeah. Oh, yeah. Zoos have come a long way though, especially the St. Louis Zoo, which is my local zoo, and I what the St. Louis Zoo has done for orangutans.
Their
Is it?
orang exhibit is so cool. I've
Yeah.
been to St. Louis Zoo a couple of times. My now husband and I, we used to meet in St. Louis
Hmm.
halfway we were kind of doing like the long distance thing. It sucked, but we'd meet in St. Louis and like we'd go to the zoo all the time. And their orang exhibit is awesome.
Oh
It's really,
yes, yeah. It's like
and the
one of
orangs
the
seem quite happy there. I mean, yeah,
yeah, and they're there as ambassadors too. You got to think of them as ambassadors for their species to say, hey, these guys are losing so much land.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I'm a big advocate for zoos. Like I know it's sad. Of course it's sad. It's sad that animals can't be in their natural habitat, but like some of them cannot go back and where better to put them than a place where humans can actually see them and grow to appreciate them and care about them. I mean, think about this is the the zoo, your local zoo is like the only like time that the vast majority of people can ever interact with these species in any capacity. I think it's important. And that's how you get people to give a shit.
yeah, absolutely. All right, let me. I got a couple more things I just wanted to wrap up on. The in captivity, chimps in captivity are not. Let's go over the chimps are not pets. Just real quick.
Chimps, zero primate pets. None. Never have a primate pet ever, you guys. It is such a bad idea. They are like even like your dumber primates are like within the range of like young humans as far as their intelligence and stimulation needs go. And when primates are understimulated, like think about what happens when humans get understimulated. They do very what would be the word, like aberrant things, like they're more violent than they should be and more anxious than they should be and all sorts of stuff like that. So pet primates are bad in general. Pet chimpanzees is like another level of bad. That's like bad, but the consequences can be lethal. You're talking about raising from childhood, right? A little person that will eventually grow to the intelligence of like a 3 to 4 year old human that is as strong as as like three guys, like three adult human males that are in shape. And when they get mad, when 3 to 4 year old kids get mad, they throw a temper tantrum. What happens when you get like three guys throwing a temper tantrum, but it's in the body of one large animal? They start breaking stuff and they can hurt people. Even if it's unintentional, they can hurt people. And sometimes it's intentional because, as you had Travis in the notes,
Yeah,
Travis was a pet chimpanzee, and they kept him dosed up on, what was it, Valium?
yeah. He was all drugged up, and the person, one of his friends, he saw what was carrying his favorite toy while he was in a mood.
And he was dosed out of his mind. I mean,
Yeah,
this chimpanzee, he was also incredibly like, he was like overnourished, so he was like large even for a chimpanzee. He was a male, and yeah, he just like ripped the face off the person carrying his toy. And she has become an advocate, for people surviving trauma and things like that. But like when they talk about how violent that attack was, it truly was. Because like we said, we were talking earlier about how chimpanzees treat other chimpanzees. That's a chimpanzee that is socialized with other chimps. Travis thought he was a person. He'd never seen another chimp, right? I mean, so he
yeah,
sees her, this woman who's carrying his stuff, as another chimp, and acts out violently, and does to her what normally chimps do to each other, which is systematically annihilate them.
yeah.
Um, Not good.
No, Travis. That's tragic. Tragic. And people who do these things, who get these chimps as pets, the chimp is basically suffering from mental illness based on it not being able to live in its normal social group. It's the same thing as keeping elephants in captivity, which I am also completely against. And as private zoos or private collections, it's disgusting to keep these animals that way. They need to have their social structures, and they need to be able to interact with their own kind and not be overly stimulated by human interference. That's just my opinion. They're, like you
No,
said.
no, it's absolutely true. I mean, chimpanzees that are able to be around other chimps don't do this to people, right? Like this is the critical difference. Like chimps don't attack adult humans like this. And again, like Frodo is the exception. He was considered to be like very antisocial as far as chimpanzees go, but like we have antisocial people as well. I don't mean it in the actual DSM-5. Like I'm using it colloquially. People who aren't socialized as well, and it can create
Mhm.
problems when they're interacting with other people. But like, yeah, Frodo wasn't socialized properly with other chimpanzees. He was naturally kind of predisposed to violence, and that's why he acted out. Other than that, like, it's relatively uncommon. Chimps don't kill people in their regular interactions. Even chimps that interact with people all the time, like at sanctuaries or zoos or places like that. They're quite cooperative and very chill. But you can't take a chimpanzee away from every other member of its own kind where it can't interact, it can't learn social norms. It's like I think about like Siegfried and Roy, right? Like, they got mauled by their tigers.
Yeah.
From my understanding, those tigers, and I don't know very much about the situation, and I'm also not a big cat expert, but my understanding is that the tigers weren't even trying to kill them. They were behaving as they would with like other tigers, which a tiger behaving like that to another tiger, like batting another tiger or biting the scruff of another tiger, is not going to kill another tiger. It will kill a squishy human. So it's like, we don't even for sure know that, I mean, in Travis's case, I think it's pretty clear that he was behaving with lethal force, because
he was doing what the chimps in the war were doing. Yeah.
Right.
Sending a message.
But like most chimpanzees, when they interact with each other, and like even when chimpanzees act up on like tour groups and stuff like that, when you're walking through the jungle and things like that, they're gonna they might like smack you or drag you a couple of feet or something like that, but they're not gonna try to kill you. I mean, they're capable of fighting with each other within their group and not administering lethal force. It's it's messed up. So never ever support people who get primates for pets. Don't do it. It's a bad idea.
All right, and just a couple more things. We have the billy apes. We talked about those a bit, but yeah, they're just big Eastern chimpanzees, as far as I understand, and it was a sensationalized story, but exactly the last quest for this mystery ape, right?
Yeah, and they're quite large Eastern chimpanzees, and there's this thing where like chimpanzees, apes in general, when they're large enough, because of the amount that they have to chew, this is typical for large animals in general, but they tend to form a sagittal crest. So it's a crest of bone that goes across the sagittal plane of the skull. And the sagittal crest is typically found in males because males tend to be larger and things like gorillas. But even in the billy apes, like, you can find a little partial crest or like a keel in some of the females. And the reason is because they're big. The males are big, the females are big. They're all really big. And so when people first saw them, they're like, oh, this is the killer ape, because these apes were notoriously like shy around people, and it's because they didn't live even near any local groups, really. So they didn't even have the human interaction that most other groups of wild apes do, which is that there are people that live around them, and so they at least see and encounter people. These guys they didn't see people at all, so they were like, what the heck is this? And they were out of there. So they're big Eastern chimps that have minimal human interaction, and you get a very mysterious ape. So
yeah. Well, there was so they killed a leopard was one of the big stories about that, but chimps can kill. And leopards are something that they band together. If there's something other than other apes that they kill, I guess leopards, or other primates they kill, I guess leopards would be up there on the list.
Sure. I mean, why not? Right? Like, you get a leopard that comes into as you know, big cats they're ambush predators, right? Mm-hmm. They're not grapplers. So if a chimpanzee can survive the initial contact with a leopard, where it comes to try to get at the back of the neck and they manage to turn or whatever, they've actually got a pretty decent chance of fending it off. And I imagine in this situation, whatever it was, the leopard just couldn't get away. It was like, call an ambulance, but not for me.
And they got the chimps have, how long can a chimp's canine generally get?
Big. Yeah, they get pretty big. I got chimp back here.
Oh,
they can get pretty big. I mean, this is a male. But males, they're about 20-30% larger than females in the canine height, but females can get pretty big. I mean, they're not that dimorphic. They get pretty big.
Yeah. Apes have a pretty good bite force too, from what I understand. Like you were talking about the sagittal crest, so they sink their teeth into that leopard's throat or something, it's over.
Humans actually have a pretty decent bite force for what we are as well. I mean, we don't have the sagittal crest, but we do have nice big temporalis and masseter. Got a nice situation there, but we also have really small jaws, so that might be influenced.
Because we started cooking our food, lazy.
I know.
Yeah.
If you don't use it, you lose it. Sometimes.
Now you want to just before we close out, this is the last bit I have on here. Was I guess I got Harambe on the very end there, but
Rest in peace.
Yeah. The Deloise ape. Do you want to touch on that real quick?
Deloise ape. Okay, am I allowed to? Can I bring up genitals? Am I going to demonetize us if we talk genitals for a minute?
No, you go ahead and talk genitals.
Okay. So the thing about Deloise ape. So Deloise ape was this. It's a picture, a famous cryptid picture that supposedly came out of South America, and they were like, "We found this big ape. It's definitely an ape. It's definitely not a member of Ateles for sure. It's definitely not just a spider monkey with a forced perspective. It's for sure an ape. It's not. The Deloise ape looks like verbatim like an Atelid. Specifically, like I think what they say is Ateles Shemek or Peniscus, one of the two. It's a spider monkey. And one of the ways that we know it's a spider monkey, to get a bit graphic, is spider monkey females are known for having enlarged clitorises, not unlike what you see with hyenas. And so Deloise ape, everything's right there, right? It's very characteristic. You can see this is a spider monkey. It's got the enlarged clitoris. It's got the almost gibbon-esque face where they've got this large eyes, kind of a reduced prognathic face, but they still have decently large canines. Big lanky arms that are perfect for brachiation, relatively short legs. Deloise ape is not an ape. As much as I would love, more than anything, for there to be a secret, hitherto unfound species of hominid living in South America that isn't humans, it's a spider monkey.
That's a spider monkey. Right?
And the biggest tell is they took one picture and it's from the front. You can't see its butt. You don't know if it has a tail or not. There's
they
no
gotta hide that tail. Yeah.
the tail. So
yeah, and then the story about it, what happened to it too, like, oh, we cut its head off because we couldn't take the whole thing because it was so big, and then we used the head as an ashtray and it decomposed. It's like, what? You discover a missing link, because the idea was pushed as this racial idea of multi what do they call it, the opposite out of Africa.
Yeah, multi-regional.
Yes. And
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the killer ape stuff, to briefly get political, there are roots there as well, right? There is the desire to call areas that are non-westernized, like these secret places that are primitive, and hold the missing link that still lives in harmony with the savage races. And I mean, come on, right? Like, and of course the ape always, like you said earlier, the killer ape always steals like a white blonde, and it's like,
yes,
it's curious.
King Kong, right there.
Yeah, it's quite strange, because like we sent nothing but Caucasian Western women to study all the groups of apes, and they all came back perfectly fine. Yep. So
yeah, with no ape hybrid babies or anything like that coming out of it.
Nope.
Yeah, that's what. Next time I have you on, I think that's what I want to cover with you too. By the way, is the human ape experiments. At some point, we got to talk about that. With Stalin's ape men and all that.
Yeah, I think the guy's name was Ivanov. Yeah, we can talk all about that, because I'm of the opinion, right? Like, humans,
you think it's possible?
If you could bypass the zona pellucida, the kind of shell, quote unquote, the membrane around the egg that like gate checks sperm that comes through, I don't know if anything would actually come to term, but like, there are plenty of other hybrids that have mismatched numbers of chromosomes that if you do artificial insemination, you can get a hybrid, which is weird.
Have they ever hybridized the panins?
To my knowledge, no. In fact, someone said the other day, it was Tompkins. Tompkins said the other day, he was like, yeah, the chimpanzees and bonobos are interfertile. I don't know if they are. It wouldn't surprise me if they were, but like, I've never heard of a hybrid actually.
I haven't either. Yeah,
I've not ever heard of that happening, and the reason I would imagine is because there is reproductive isolation here. It's social. There's social reproductive isolation. A bonobo would never solicit a chimpanzee, or rather, a chimpanzee would never solicit a bonobo, one or the other. Whatever, any kind of match going on there. Plus, they're separated by the Congo. They're both endangered. Like, the only time I could ever imagine this happening is if someone happened to house the two together. But like, logistically, that has, I don't think, ever happened, simply because they live in just drastically different portions of Africa, right? Like,
So I would have suspected that, like in early zoos, that they may have not known the difference between bonobos and chimps and housed them together at certain points. I wonder if that might be part of the social stress that we see for these wild killer apes behaviors, because you got two different species that these dumb apes can't tell the difference between. So
It wouldn't surprise me if they could hybridize. Like humans could hybridize with Neanderthals, although I believe there's still some argument for potential hybrid sterility in some pairs, depending on who mom is and who dad is, which species. I don't know. I mean, reproductive isolation is so weird and it's so haphazard in the way that it happens, because like you can get reproductive isolation quickly, like in the ring species that we see with some of the salamanders out in California. And then you have, American sturgeon, or sorry, American paddlefish and Russian sturgeon, and they can hybridize and they split like 230 million years ago. So it's like something along those lines, like somewhere just 200 plus million years ago. So I don't know if it's 30 exactly, but
yeah,
evolution is weird.
Like split when the Chinese and American alligators split, same time frame. Yeah,
and they can still hybridize. So like, or when, excuse me, like when they can hybridize, like when they're housed in the same area, right? These sturgeon, these paddlefish.
Yeah, they produce offspring. Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
But only available too. So like, even like it's just crazy. Evolution is nuts. Life finds a way.
All right, and I got the last question. Yeah, I mentioned Harambe. Was Harambe the victim of the killer ape myth?
Man, the Harambe situation is so dicey, right? Because it's like, I'm a primatologist. I love primates, but at the same time, like, there was a kid in danger with that, right? Like, you have a kid who fell into, a pit with a father silverback who had not been a father, to my understanding. So, like, he just did not know how to react with this intruder. Kids have fallen into pens with apes so many times, and we've had one fatality, and it was with Harambe, and Harambe was the fatality, right? Like,
yeah,
it just, I don't think, from my understanding of talking with folks who specialize with gorillas or who study gorillas, they've told me like it's probably unlikely that Harambe would have killed the kid, but he could have gotten seriously hurt with all the dragging, and that could have caused some kind of permanent injuries to the child. And so it's like Harambe probably wasn't trying to kill him, but the danger, the risk was there for being seriously harmed, and so they shot him to save the kid. And it's such a tragic situation, right? Like, because Harambe, it wasn't really his fault, right? Like, this kid falls into his house and he's like, what the hell is this? And he's like messing around with him, hurting him unintentionally though. And really who should be punished is the parents of that kid who weren't watching him. I mean,
well, every time a kid falls into a animal pit at a zoo, that it's the parent who is responsible for that child, right?
Who's watching the kid? Yeah, or like little kids who like stick their hands into the caged bars and stuff like that, and they get their fingers nipped by a bird or something. I don't know. I hope they got fined. I hope something happened. I hope something bad happened with them, because that just sucks. That sucks so much.
Yeah, poor guy.
Poor guy.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, any final thoughts on the killer ape and the history behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I think my final thoughts with it are like this was a cryptid that was originally put forward kind of on the basis of these initial interactions that people were having and misunderstanding with animals like gorillas and perhaps chimpanzees, but probably more likely gorillas. This idea perpetuated itself because people, tend to take these urban legends and spin them, or perhaps, people were exacerbating, sorry, I got a dog, or perhaps people were exacerbating them due to encounters with captive animals that were especially violent due to the nature of these animals. They're kept stressed and anxious early on in the history of zoos. And so as a result, people come up with this idea that like, well, the killer ape must have come from somewhere. It's probably still lurking out there in the African continent. And people love to stick cryptids in places where it's really hard to look for. So
yeah, there's dinosaurs out there in the Congo too.
The Mokele and Mbembe. Yeah, the creationists love that one. That one creationist guy has been out there like 40 times looking for that thing. Still hasn't found it. Yeah, but long story short, there is a killer ape. That's right, the punchline. The killer ape is here. We were the killer ape all along.
Yes. The call was coming from inside the house, right?
It was coming from inside the house. It was probably, you get right down to it. Humans are humans, and we're apes, and apes have personalities that differ greatly. We're very much subject to the pressures of our in-groups, and it's just, it's just good old-fashioned run-of-the-mill social variety that I think lends itself to a lot of the violence that we see in non-human apes, or inappropriate housing and drugging them up with Valium.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, I appreciate you swinging by to hang out, and again, I would love to have you back to talk about the ape hybrid theory and all that at some point.
Yeah.
In time, so.
Yeah, we gotta make that happen at some point. I gotta read up on it more though, because like it's been quite some time. And the last I'd heard of it was like might be possible, but like who's gonna test it? Like I would want that to happen, right? Like I'm very interested, but I kind of wish it was one of those things where it was like someone already was ethically dubious in the past, and we can know from their horrible actions and not have to ponder it now. But then that would also require someone in the past to have experienced something horrible like that, so I don't want that either. My curiosity exists, but this is one of those when Reddit asks like if you could do one unethical experiment with no consequences, like it's all a simulation or something like that would be an interesting one to ask.
Yeah. What would you even do with the offspring of that? There's a whole lot of ethics to go.
There's so much bad with it, man. Like it's. I think that's honestly one of the bigger ones too. Like, how do you bring a critter like that into the world? Like the only one of its kind. Like clearly socially inclined, intelligent. Like, and then there's the whole like. I mean, you'd have to do it. I think you do it in a lab, right? Like, but the person who donates, the egg or the sperm, like that's a whole thing too. Like, there's that's dubious. Like, there's just.
Because does it have the rights of a human? Would somebody have to have parental rights over it? Would the lab have parental rights over it? All these dubious things where I don't even know where you would start. Human hybrids.
A mess. Like, I honestly think the only way to solve this problem would be to program it, right? To like come up with a way to simulate, the cellular replication, right at conception, and then be like, what if you had, an egg that looked like this and sperm that looked like this? What would happen? And that would have to be the way that you go about it. Because the rest is just too.
It gets a little creepy outside.
Little creepy.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks again for dropping in, and remember to be kind and take care. And we will see you next time.
Croatian national anthem. Seem to face up to the facts. I'm tense and nervous and I can't relax. I can't sleep cause my bed's on fire. Don't touch me, I'm a red light wire. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Better run, 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 run away. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Better run, 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 run away. You start a conversation, you can't even finish it. You talk a lot, but you're not saying anything. When I have nothing to say, my lips are sealed. Say something once, now why would you say it again? Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Better run, 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 run away. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Better run, 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 run away. Oh. people when they're not polite. We are vain, we are vain, we are blind, we are blind. Look, I hate people when they're not polite. Psycho killer, oh, qu'est-ce que c'est? Run, 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 run away. Psycho killer, wee, qu'est-ce que c'est?